uh, tell me about your love for that book. I'm curious. I am curious because
Well,
it's so
I mean,
interesting.
well, for me, it's, it's uh, this is where they start, in my view. I love the Greeks. My most favorite is the Iliad and the Odyssey, because
Hmm.
in the stories are illustrated some of these ideas and concepts,
Hmm.
love for wife, fidelity,
Hmm.
the importance of family, uh, the sacredness of the family,
Right.
keeping your word, keeping your promise, obligations, those things, forgiveness, because the Menelaus's forgiveness of Helen is touching. I mean, to me, it just tore at me when
Yeah.
he's ready to kill her, and Odysseus says, "I want you to forgive Helen."
Yeah.
And those things, I just, you know, um, eat the lotus plant. There is no hope for home. Remember that one,
Hmm.
where addictions will keep you from your true purpose.
Right.
Those things. So, but it's interesting to watch an intellect, because Socrates, of course,
Right.
has a real brain, deal with on an intellectual basis, and this is almost like Korihor,
Hmm.
where Korihor
Yeah.
becomes so powerful to use, and of course Satan. I mean,
Right.
that's the technique.
Yeah.
Um, have you ever read the Screw Tape Letters, by the way, Pella?
I
Because
have, but it's been so. I only read it once, so I
well,
didn't commit much of it to memory. But yeah.
so so it's to me it illustrates the flaws that you can touch a little bit on truth.
Hmm. Yeah.
I forget Socrates' reply. They finally ask him, and it takes him a while to reply to it. But that wasn't important to me. The
Yeah.
concept of,
The
because it's
concept.
I love and I think the right word is entertaining the ideas.
Right.
See if they resonate with truth as I know, because truth comes from intellect and feeling.
Hmm.
That's the method. We find truth.
Yeah.
Then, then we know where the truth is. Yeah, but they're good men. I think Socrates was a good guy.
Yeah.
I think Plato was. I think his brother was. They tried to find the right way,
Hmm.
deal with all these issues.
Yes.
And they're coming from a harsh environment. I think, the Greeks could fight. I mean, they knew how to fight.
They did. Yes.
So values, attitudes, and beliefs, right, kiddo?
Right. Right. Talk to me about that. Let's go from there. Our values, attitudes, and beliefs. How do
Well,
those play into the things that I guess that you do, things that we all do?
my approach is this. If we're dealing with an issue, we want to get to the core of where it's coming from.
Hmm.
It's one
Right.
thing to scratch the surface superficially, and this is true with companies, it's true with police work, with everything. I think is if we just pick at the surface, we're really not going to make any kind of change.
Hmm.
We have to go to the source, the wellspring, right?
Right.
And then metaphorically, men's search for the source is, a powerful motivation. Like,
Hmm.
where does the Nile start? Where does the
Right.
what's the source for the Mississippi?
Mississippi. Hmm.
You know, I mean,
Yeah.
those are famous stories, right?
Yeah.
And where does the Amazon begin?
Right.
And they'll spend their lives and fortune and at risk to try to figure it out, find out where it all begins. Well,
Hmm.
for me, a beginning point is culture.
Yeah.
And and if we deal at the core level, then we can make changes as the implications of that core level, that source,
Yeah.
is adjusted, and and that's the rippling effect.
Right.
throw stone in the water and then there's ripples out. So where does the implications begin? And it's always culture and civilizations.
Yeah.
It's where we have a history for how did we start as a nation? How do other countries start? Where do they come from?
Mm-hmm.
Those are important issues because they then show how culture develops. Values, how does a group of people or a singular person embrace values?
Mm-hmm.
Now the Republic's just full of that.
Yeah.
I mean, that's what they talk about. And then their attitudes towards those values
Mm-hmm.
and how deeply they will embrace those values, which are, the beliefs that will be held.
Right.
Beliefs come from, they are the wellspring of tradition, those things. And you can study Moses and how he has all these things that he does to make sure that he's embedded in a belief system,
Mm-hmm.
so that his people will survive. And he was instructed to do it that way.
Yeah. Yeah.
So have I been clear?
Yes. In fact,
Now
I'm like
this
going through the stories of Moses
yeah,
in my head and thinking, okay, now what did I miss here?
right, because we know from when Moses they break free 500 years of captivity, enslavement, it's
Right.
slowly evolving. So it's generation after generation after generation for 500 years. Our country's not 500 years old.
Yeah.
And we have to imagine the implications of this.
Mm-hmm.
And he's now going to, and the term in business is, and you've heard, because this is a business thing, transitional management,
Mm-hmm.
paradigm shift,
Right.
and the process of moving an organization from one point to another, and
Yes.
how you do it. Stakeholders. It's done through customs and practices, as I said. It's done through rituals.
Yeah.
The beauty of true rituals are that they embedded in them are truth
Mm-hmm.
and speak to truth, so that at every level, both intellectual, even to the subconscious level, it resonates. And then, as you know, the word discipline comes from disciple. That's the root word, and disciple
Yes.
is a expression of a change of heart,
Mm-hmm.
true
So,
change. That's paradigm shift.
right. Paint that for me a little bit in the story of Moses.
Well, he was, I think, I can't speak for Moses, but I sort of envision it this way. He gets them out of Egypt.
Mm-hmm.
They're in the desert. There's a big group of people. And he goes up to Mount Sinai, he's instructed,
Mm-hmm.
and has 40 days. And he's not given the 10 Commandments at that point. He's given the temple ordinances.
Mm-hmm.
That was they have gone through the trials, generation upon generation, and now they're going to be given the temple ordinances. And that's what's on the first set of tablets. I think if you read what the brethren say about it, that's what the understanding is.
Mm-hmm.
He's coming down off the mountain. Now I'm going to be pretty blunt, and there's a bunch of people down below that are taking off their clothes and dancing around a golden calf.
Right.
And
Yeah.
it really upsets him.
Right.
And so they have broken their opportunity to go from where they are into the temple.
Mm-hmm.
Now it becomes preparatory. He goes back, and now he's given the 10 Commandments, which is the level of entrance, what's necessary. In that story, we see the implications of the absence of a rod. Moses.
Right.
The people fall apart. They need that leadership. They have to have it to rebut, and it's a demonstration of the power of Satan. So, but what Moses gives them carries them and carries them to this day.
This is very interesting. I love the way that you see and understand things. I really, every time I think of, especially of the story of Moses, the main thing I think of is that he's pulled a very huge group of people, you know, out
Yeah,
of
a lot
one
of people.
situation. Hmm?
Yeah, a
Yeah.
lot of people don't understand how they got that was in the millions.
Yeah, exactly. And he's trying to answer and field questions for all of them and give them all of them like direction every single day. So every time I think of Moses, I'm overwhelmed. And I'm grateful that at some point Jethro sat him down and said, you need to start breaking these people up and delegating some of this work.
Yeah.
And
Well,
that's where
that's
I stop because I'm like, I'm overwhelmed by how much Moses didn't organize these people until, yeah, that's all.
yeah.
It's interesting to think of the different levels. I hadn't thought much about his descent into the mountains and then coming back twice. I didn't realize. Okay, we're here with too much. You're not going to be able to do this because I came down and you guys are already cutting up. Let me go back and let's come down with some simple rules. Let's start here and build
Right.
up.
There has to be a starting point. Correct.
Yeah.
I learned a long time ago, and it goes back to my experiences on the department when I would see how people treated each other. You know, I mean, a police officer sees a lot of things, but for some reason in my assignments, I saw a lot. I think probably as much that of what a human being can do to another human being. I mean, it's just incredible.
Mm-hmm.
Like my first dead body call as a deputy was 8. 8. I mean, I thought this is really going to be something, this career.
Yeah.
Uh, there's a lot going on in LA.
Yeah.
So anyway, so I learned early, I can learn something here.
Mm-hmm.
I always tried to, whatever I was in, whatever circumstances, because I don't think, Paula, much happens by chance with us.
Right.
That includes your children, your marriage, your divorce,
Mm-hmm.
being your dad's daughter,
Yeah.
your great dad. Just think.
Yeah. I
So,
know. I know. Yeah. I know what you
and the
mean.
and the legacy and that you'll tell your boys, So it's with that attitude. If you go into life with that attitude, then you realize, and of course the root of that has to be, I'm here for, I came from another place.
Mm-hmm.
I have a purpose here. If you really believe that, then what's going on is not necessarily by chance.
Mm-hmm.
And if even if it's tough, knowing I'm being protected, I'm being watched over, and I will get through this. And when I do, I'll have more wisdom. But there's some people that go through those things and don't receive much wisdom. They just get resentful for what's happened to them,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Yeah.
Well, you can see that in itself flavors life itself, right?
Right.
You know.
Yeah. Resentment is it's
Now
poison.
that's Socrates missed that part.
I'm at the beginning of the
Just think
book, so you walk me
just
through that.
just think what he would have come up with
Mm-hmm.
if what he was saying was based on the reality, not just the understanding, the reality that his soul is eternal. He and all he's teaching, all the people they've conquered, we all have the same Father in heaven. Just think what that would have done
Yeah.
to take his mind through the logical steps that he's developed to come to the conclusions he came to.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
It'd
Absolutely.
be it'd be amazing, wouldn't it?
It would be. There would be a different depth, a different layer, which I assume would be quite
So
deep.
when you read when you read stuff from those people, you got to
Mm-hmm.
think, where are they coming from? I mean, do they have
Right.
that kind of knowledge? I think C.S. Lewis, he he talks about it. I think he had that in
Hmm.
sort of a gut instinct about it.
Yeah.
But he certainly embraced that there's a reason for. One of the beautiful little things he said was, when God's dealing with me, he's not building a country cottage, he's building a castle. And sometimes a lot of the walls have to get knocked out. You know, it's a
Yeah.
good metaphor.
Yeah. You have this, you have a very strong sense of the humanity, the sanctity of life within you. And what is
Yeah.
that? Tell me about that.
Well, see, again, I take you back to this fundamental truth. You know, we
Mhm.
have the same Father in heaven. I think that's it. I mean,
Mhm.
that's the point. The start of the universe.
Right. Yes.
Roger Clark. Okay. Which implies he's there, he's real, all that stuff.
Right.
Okay. So I'll tell you a story about I'm doing this deposition for a New Mexico case,
Mhm.
and it's just a terrible shooting of a guy who's off the, he's mentally ill, he's taken a car, they get him stopped, they think he has a knife, and he gets out of the car according to what they tell him, and he starts coming back to them, and they kill him. I mean, they just fill him full of hot lead. So, and of course, the store for the police defense is, well, he has a edged weapon and he's threatening the officers, and the officers have a right to protect themselves.
Right.
So my response typically to that is, I never shot anybody with a knife. It's a knife. You stay out of the way. Blah blah blah. I go through all the tactics and everything. But somewhere along the line, I said, the right to life is a constitutional right. This guy, it's like a core horror experience with some of these guys.
Mhm.
And so he works me over. Now, in the federal rules, you can only talk for 7 hours on a deposition, and then that's it, But you can go back to the judge and get more time. And he's come from New Mexico to San Diego, and it's on video.
Mhm.
It worked me over. So he gets more time and he comes back. So at first round number 2.
Yeah, I'm already exhausted for you.
Now, and this, it's about a week has passed, and I get noticed. He's ordered me back for another deposition. We
Yes.
arranged for it. And I knew that he has really done his best to be as clever as possible.
Right.
And that maybe not the first question, but very quickly into the deposition, he's going to try give me on point on the video what he thinks is going to nail me.
Right.
And sure enough, I sit down, I get sworn in again, and he goes, where in the Constitution does it say right to life? I go, oh, this is my moment.
Hang on. Oh.
And the rule is, if they ask a question, you get all the time you need to answer it.
Oh.
They can't interrupt it, which he tried to do a couple of times. And I said, counselor, I'm not through yet with my answer. So I said, well, let me put it this way. When the founding fathers struggled with the notion, what gives us the right to break away from our monarch? They wrote a document called the Declaration of Independence. And in it, they said that there are inalienable rights given to all men at birth from a creator. And there are 3 things: life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. He thought I was going to end there. But now, as I understand it, in the Supreme Court, there's a mural of Moses with the 10 Commandments.
Mhm.
And as you may or may not know, Moses wrote the first books, the 5 books of the book of the Bible. And the first book he wrote was Genesis. And in that book, he starts with the creation of the world and the creation of Adam and Eve.
Mm-hmm.
And in that, he makes it clear that God gives Adam life. In other words, the source of Adam's life is God.
God. Mm-hmm.
And therefore, it's an inalienable right. It comes with birth. And that was recognized as a fundamental truth in the Declaration of Independence. And then he gives Adam choice. That's the second thing, choice. Life and liberty. That's liberty. And then he gives Adam the choice to make decisions that will, the fundamental truth from Moses is that men want to be happy. And that so it goes in that series, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And he wants to stop me there. I said, no, there's more. So
you did this to yourself, sir. And here we go.
So I said, with that knowledge, they embedded it. And that's what gives them the right. Of course, there's a real commentary about the purpose of government and abuses of King George, etc., that gives them, because they trample on these inalienable rights, these inalienable rights. I said, and then, of course, 10 years later, when they wrote the Constitution, they were insisted on 10 amendments, and they're embedded in the 10 Amendment. The right to life is, so their counsel is I said, maybe there's some case law that maybe you want to, I think there's some case law I can discuss with you, like Graham versus Connor, Tennessee versus Garner, blah, blah. You know. Said, but I think that's basically it. And the videographer.
Yeah. Videographer, yeah.
He shouts out, he says, I really like that. So it's in the video.
Oh.
So does that help?
Yes, it does. So this idea.
So what you discussed and what you wanted to do is you wanted to strip away the layers to the wellspring, which we discussed, right?
Yeah.
Which is the natural desire of all men, right?
Yeah.
See how we've developed this point. Okay.
Yes. So now with that now in our pockets, this idea, sanctity of life, and something that you hold quite dear and actually operate from. Mm-hmm.
Right. So if you have reverence for life, so when I discuss it to juries, there's 3 things that have to be considered when the use of lethal force. Now we're not talking about grappling with somebody to put him in handcuffs or those types of things. Mm-hmm. It's what are they when you get there's levels of force that are defined in the teaching, in the training. It's a way to approach it. Mm-hmm. There's lots of ways to look at this problem, Pela.
Right. Various
lenses.
Yeah.
Right? Some more effective than others, but some just as valid as others. Just remember that, the way you approach things. Yeah. So, but in use of lethal force, reverence for life, only in the direst of circumstances, and only absent an obvious, reasonable alternative. Now, I don't hold anybody to you could have done it another way. No, if it was obvious, mm-hmm. and you decided not to do the obvious, which would have spared life, then you're culpable for the taking of that life. And most of what I do is lethal force that results in death. That's the majority of the cases I take.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Tell me about, let's cover your career real quick. You decided to become a police officer. What year was it?
That was a long time. So 1965. When was Dad born?
Mine was, 53.
In 53, I was in high school.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
So
you got a little time on him.
I was 25 years old. I came on the department in 1965, and I retired in 1993. A year after the Rodney King riot, I had a platoon in Rodney King. So I was 6 years as a deputy rank, mm-hmm. six years as a sergeant rank, and then 15 and a half years as a lieutenant rank. Mm-hmm. Retired out as a lieutenant.
Okay. What do those, well, I'm not going to ask what the ranks imply because I'm not really sure. I understand military
Well,
ranks better.
it's not. That's like akin to so a deputy would be a line officer.
Hmm.
Uh, in the rank structure in the sheriff's department is very simple. Some departments have a pretty complex. They have sergeant grades. They have
Hmm.
officer grades. Officer 1, 2, and 3, and all that. We didn't have any of that. So as a deputy, which would be a line officer, patrol officer, as well as a detective. I was a detective for 2 years at that
Hmm.
rank, investigator. Then sergeant's next, and that sergeant is a first line supervisor.
Hmm.
And then the lieutenant typically can be a command level. The department had 250 lieutenant. My department had 7,000 sworn officers.
Hmm.
So 600 of those, about 650 were sergeants, 250 were lieutenants, and then 60 were captains. So the structure is pretty much a steep pyramid.
Yeah.
And then on up to the sheriff himself. So the lieutenant mostly was a mid manager. There were
Hmm.
5 in my department, 5 command levels lieutenants. I had 2 of those at one point.
Hmm.
Um, and then captain, area commander, division chief, under sheriff, assistant sheriff, and sheriff. So it's very sharp.
Hmm.
So most of the time, I would be a bureau commander as a lieutenant. I would be a watch commander as a lieutenant. That type of stuff.
Now, I recall from our conversation, but also from listening to your interview on the podcast, was A Nation Divided. Um, there were some things that you did that could potentially have, and I think actually did affect your ability to continue to rank up. Is that correct? When you
I think it.
stood?
I think it influenced that considerably, but never bothered me and never bothered the wife. So it was not. It never. I loved every rank I had. I didn't worry about trying to. I applied.
Yeah.
Everybody did because I thought I could be good at it. But
Hmm.
uh, when you get to the rank after the rank of lieutenant, it's just the sheriff has pick of the litter, literally, and he
Right.
decides for himself what he wants. And I was
Hmm.
not one of those people.
Tell me about the significant discovery that you made that ended up being a roadblock.
Well, there are a number of them, but the big one was that when I was commanding Crescenta Valley Station, which is like a precinct or a division,
Hmm.
I was still a lieutenant, but the captain had exited out on an illness, and they never bothered to replace him with fundamentally the understanding that next go around I would be promoted to captain
Hmm.
and take command of that station. So I had it as a lieutenant, as a um, commanding, but so it's like an acting captain type thing.
Right. Right.
So I get a call from the undersheriff who says, we're going to send you Bob Armstrong to your station as a inmate, and it's going to be your handle. Well, all I knew about Bob Armstrong was he was a deputy that got into a lot of trouble and was tried in court and found guilty of manslaughter and sentenced to county time, which made him a county inmate. And he had this sentence to serve. And of course, I'm getting a previous deputy, and Bob Edmonds, says he's really distraught mentally.
Hmm.
His partner that he worked with for years got his wife pregnant. They've run off together. And it's going to be your job to see that he's stable enough to do his sentence before he gets loose.
Hmm.
because the station had a contingent of inmates that would be, do the lawn, wash the cars.
Right.
They were janitorial
Hmm.
help. And we had, the stations were built where they had housing, special housing, and they were saved the department a lot of money to have something like that instead of civilians. So,
Right.
and they're called trustees. So he comes to me as a trustee, and I talk to him, and I decide that, and I give him a job. He's going to paint with a crew. He's going to supervise the other trustees to paint the basement of the station.
Hmm.
But I realized he's very, very troubled, as I expected, but that he had a story to tell. So I decided I'm going to spend 15 minutes a day with him to make sure, just watch him
Right.
and get a sense. So it wasn't too long. He tells the story of how he happened to be arrested. And it was that he worked in a ghetto area station called Linwood. In Linwood, there was a early morning watch commander, Dennis Slocum, who I knew, a lieutenant. And he gets these guys together and he says, I'm going to give you free rein to do anything you want here. We're going to form a club, a group, and we're going to call ourselves the Vikings. And and I have this tattoo. I have the first tattoo. And I've handpicked you guys, and they go out and they get tattooed. And it's a Viking on the calf of their leg.
Hmm.
So they would do things like steal money. They would write false reports. They would use force. They did all kinds of bad things for what they believed at the beginning was necessary to do to take the bad people off the street.
Yeah.
So now there's rules, of course, for constitutional rules when you do false entries, that kind of stuff, right, Pela? You understand you have
Right.
to have warrants, things like that.
Right.
So after being involved in this group, Barb Armstrong, gets transferred to another station or another precinct, which is remote from it's Temple Station. It's up in the San Gabriel Valley. He's not there very long, and it's an early morning, and the guys that he's having donuts with are sitting around the donut shop complaining about a crack house. It's really easy to spot these places, and the protocol is you turn it over to narcotics, they get a undercover, or they do a buy with marked money, they get the warrant, they do the house,
Hmm.
and everybody goes to jail. It's done properly, constitutional, but
Right.
it's too slow for these guys, so they're complaining about it, which is typical.
Right.
And Bob says, well, if this was the Vikings, we would have taken care of this ourselves. So they said, what are you talking about? He says, well, watch this. So he goes to a payphone. Those are payphone days.
Right.
Dials a station and says, I'm anonymous, but I live next door, and he gives this address. He says, it sounds like someone's getting killed over there. You better send some help. And then he hangs up. Then they go to the car, and over the radio gets this call. Unknown trouble, blah, blah, blah. Now Armstrong's going to take the boys over there. He's going to run up and boot this door.
Hmm.
And then they're going to toss the house. They're going to find all the stuff, the money and the product, and everybody's going to go to jail. And he's going to write a report saying that when we arrived, there was screaming.
Right.
Sounded like people were
Corroborate
troubled.
his phone call.
We had no time to get the warrant. In order to save the person in the house, we kicked the door down, and on the coffee table in the living room are cocaine, scales, money, and everybody's okay. So we took them all to jail.
Hmm.
Get the point?
Yes. Yeah.
The only trouble is that at that house, the guy who runs the business takes the money and the product away every night, leaves his pregnant girlfriend behind at the house. And the house has a really strong front door. So Armstrong runs up, Guys are following him, boots the door, can't get through.
Okay.
It won't yield. She thinks it's a disgruntled customer, picks up a rifle that the boyfriend's left her that can't work. It's 22 caliber rifle, doesn't work.
Yeah.
And she's going to chase this guy away, opens the door with the rifle. Armstrong sees it and shoots her, not realizing it's a pregnant woman. Just sees the gun, shoots her. And kills the baby, wounds her critically. So you can't manslaughter in California a fetus. I mean, you can't manslaughter a fetus because of abortion.
Right.
But you can second degree murder a fetus, and that's something.
Yeah.
So Armstrong gets convicted of second degree murder and gets sentenced to county time, and I get him. So I remember when I heard this story, I look at him and I say, Bob, tell me this is not true. And he lifts his leg and rolls up his pants and shows me, points me to the tattoo. So I say, stay there. I run to the phone, pick up the phone and call Commander Bill Hankey,
your boss, essentially.
My boss. I said, for God's sakes, get down here with the internal affairs and a tape recorder. You got to hear this story. And at that point, Hankey tells me that they know all about it. They know the entire story. And they're not doing anything about it. They're going to keep it quiet. So that is the one time, Pela, that I felt literally I was going to throw up. Made me sick.
Yeah.
And I just put the phone down. I said, this is not going to touch me. So I wrote a series of scathing memoranda in-house, didn't leak it out or anything, to the sheriff directly, laid it out. You got to do something with these, the department's not responding properly.
Mm-hmm.
These are bad people. This is going to come and get you.
Yeah.
And totally ignored, but I began to feel the displeasure. But the key point was that Edmonds, not long after that, Edmonds decides to have a meeting of all of the precinct or station commanders, and I attend.
Mm-hmm.
And he makes the statement during that time, the Vikings are nothing more than a social group. He's broadcasting the official line.
Right.
And it brought me to my feet. And so here I am with all these other station commanders, captains. I become immediately radioactive. And I said, for God's sakes, they are not tattooing the star on their chest. They're tattooing a Viking on their bodies.
Yeah.
And he glares at me, he says, sit down, Roger. And before I sat down, I said, well, there it is. Now, right now, as we speak, Pela,
Mm-hmm.
Sheriff Baca is in federal prison over the Vikings. So later on, but I called Ani's mother and said, I'm never going to be promoted. And she said, good. Her reply was, good for you.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah.
So so from that time on, I became this, that and other episodes that I could not be bought and paid for. And but that was probably one of the defining moments.
Yeah. I did not quite grasp how heavy that story was. There were a lot of details I hadn't heard before that you just shared. But it's a lot because now you have to watch your back. Did you feel like that?
Oh yeah, but what's nice about not having anything to hide?
Is not having anything to hide.
It's really not. It's really good.
Yes. That is amazing. How is it that you ended up with commanding the unit? That 5 years, in my mind, I refer to it as the 5 years of peace, even though it wasn't necessarily peace, but it was the time that you were able. Mm-hmm.
Well, they had a lieutenant previous to me, and they were shooting about 3 a month. I mean, they were shooting one a month.
Shooting what?
Shooting people, one of them,
Oh.
during their apprehensions. So then I think it was a concern, which incidentally, that lieutenant was promoted up the ranks. But I took it over, and he explained to me that you're going to have shootings regularly. I said, well, we'll take a look at it. And I did. I had a shooting for the first 3 months. I had one shooting a month, one wounding, and three episodes of shots fired, 3 different occasions. And but after that, it takes time to do the paradigm shift, the transition.
Right.
But after that, the guys got it, and but the thing of it is, you can't, for using a lethal force when they think that we're doing everything right, and it's our duty to respond quickly with lethal force. These are bad guys anyway. To shift that to that's not our job, and not only are they going to be safe, but more important to me, you are going to be safer, and this will be rewarding to you, which it was. I mean, I made the people that came in, and one time I had over 1,000 applicants for NORSAT. Everybody wanted to come to NORSAT because it was a springboard to a career. It was great work. It was high reputation, all that stuff. But it takes a while to get that going. But once it did, it just feeds on itself,
Right.
So I think that was, plus I had, there were higher ranks on the department that were appreciative, I think, to some extent. But the administrative wind was always against them. But they had the opportunity to, because it was above them, that was in their chain of command. That's how I got NORSAT. And I remember having a long talk with the division chief that said, I want you to do this, and this is what I want. And I know you can do it, that type of thing.
What was the work that was done to kind of create the paradigm shift? I mean, obviously you came in with that expectation that it's not going to work for me to just be out there gunslinging.
Well, so remember, I said the root word of discipline is disciple.
Right.
So when you have somebody who's gone sideways, I'll use that term, a deputy, for example, and you're going to impose discipline. It has to be, and this is where a lot of agencies go wrong. They fire people, they demote. You can do this. There's sometimes it has to be done, but if you can change a person's vision, then the discipline's accurate. The discipline's adequate. In fact, it's correct. What you want is to change behavior.
Right.
Honestly. Now, the church has a term, it's called repentance, right?
Right.
So that's the viewpoint from the person in authority. That would be me. And they had to know first that I was more interested than anything in them and their safety. And that there would be times if they broke these tactical rules, that it would be dangerous for them. That's the first point, So I let them know my job is to get you home safely.
Yeah.
And that had to be expressed by the leadership principles. First is example.
Okay.
You have to have a good example. You have to be a leader that cannot give a good example is worthless.
Right. And
it starts, this is me, watch me. Now that's the Savior's way, right? What manner of man should you be? Even as I am.
Right.
Did he ever turn anyone away? Can you find one scripture, one episode where he turned anybody down? No. Even the ones who weren't grateful. right?
Yeah. Yeah. And he didn't even send them away with a pox upon your house. It just, yeah.
Right. So, and then, you know, it goes from there. So, and then there's a great song, and I'm trying to remember, I think it might be Rodgers and Hammerstein, that give me 10 men, get 10 stout-hearted men who will fight for the right that they adore. Give me 10 men, 10 stout-hearted men, and I will soon give you 10,000 more. So you form this core,
Yes.
and then they become, and that was the Viking. That's the Viking way too. They formed a core, and all the bad guys went to it,
Mm-hmm.
and they booted out the good guys.
Right.
So those are some of the techniques. Now this is a management principle, and then of course you simple things like reward. I was the only, and I insisted on the sheriff doing it, developing a citation called commendable restraint, where they'd be recognized for commendable restraint,
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
and those types of things. So.
And were you able to actually award anyone with that?
Yeah, in fact, the very first one was Marty Coleman, sergeant, that we had information of a extortion payment. I won't go into the details of that, but you know, we have really good informants,
Mm-hmm.
and we were sure. So Marty was on it, and it was going to be a $20,000 extortion payment from and we were investigating a Tong gang. They were
Mm-hmm.
very, very vicious, and had them in our investigative uh, purview
Mm-hmm.
on cases of extortion
Mm-hmm.
and violence. So, and a murder. So anyway, Marty's following them, and they go to the expected location, which was a restaurant in Lincoln Heights, LA City area. We'd already notified LAPD that we were going to be there in the operation. So they were sort of in the area, general area, but they, you know, stayed away. So, and the guys, the four of them walk in, they park, they leave their car, and then they walk in, and all of a sudden it becomes guns out, bullets being fired into the ceiling, and the entire restaurant is being taken down with robbery. Now, SIS would have, the minute they start out the door, regardless of who's in the restaurant, they'd be shooting at them coming out the restaurant. But Marty disabled they had already disabled the car, because that was what we were going to do. They were going to get in the car, and we were going to take him down. He was going to take him down in the car.
Right.
And so Marty allowed that to happen. They ran out, got in the car won't start, and all of a sudden everything around them are undercover police cars with the message, you're not going anywhere.
Right.
And you're going to throw the guns out, and we're going to take you into custody. And when you're ready to hear how we're going to do it, we're going to tell you how to do it.
Mm-hmm.
Now, remember, I talked to you before, the decompression piece.
Right.
There's
Yes.
a lot of excitement at that point.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, and there could be a lot of shooting. And Marty, it took about, he says, about 10, 15 minutes for them to finally get it in their head that if they don't,
game's up. Yeah.
Yeah, and the guns are coming out. So that was the very first, and a lot of really good intelligence came out of that case about the Tongs and their activities in the Asian community, Chinese community in particular, and a lot of arrests. So it was fruitful, very, very fruitful. But that's the very first commendable restraint citation. So I got, I had the artist do a really nice citation signed by the department,
Mhm.
and lettered with a star. Everybody got a framed copy and met with the sheriff in his office and got handshakes.
That is amazing, because it sounds like no guns actually came out. Is that correct?
Well, they were at gunpoint and they
Mhm.
tossed their guns out. Yeah,
Okay, so it's just no shots fired then.
no shots fired.
What was the understanding then? How do you communicate with people who are clearly violent already, right?
Well, that
They,
was a
and
good example, and that is, if they had started shooting Paula, of course
Mhm.
we would return fire.
Right, right. I
But
mean, you're prepared.
right, they're prepared. Right, the men are prepared. They're behind. We have a term we call cover. They were inadequate cover,
Hmm.
and the car was blockaded. Couldn't go anywhere. Couldn't even start.
Yeah,
So they're trapped. Now, if they got out and made a run for it, there would have been gunfire. But
hmm.
the way Marty approached it, and
What did Marty do? What did he
well,
say?
he said, "Sheriff's Department, and stay in the car. Don't
Hmm.
move. Stay in the car. Listen to us."
Yeah.
You know, and then there's a bit of flurry. I imagine there was quite a bit of conversation. He says, "Now toss the guns out." And
Hmm.
I think of hearing them tell me about it was, "Screw you," that type of
Yeah.
thing.
Yeah.
And
It feels like such a desperate situation, especially for the men who are trapped.
exactly. So they had two choices,
Hmm.
right? But what
Right.
you want to convey is that you may expect that we're going to shoot you when you come out. So, and you may want to try to shoot it out, but we're telling you the truth. We're not going to shoot you, but you're going to do what we tell you.
Yeah. Okay. So let's backtrack for a second. You're talking about, you set up your department, and the leadership is really, the leaders are the ones who set the example, build the culture, right?
Right. So the
So,
message is, and this is, to, for the line, how can I expect you to do what I tell you when what I do thunders in your ears?
yes. Yeah. Yep. Your actions are so loud. Yes. So how did you end up shifting the department? Did you talk to them, or it was a lot just your example, or?
No. So after every single apprehension, every
Hmm.
one,
Hmm.
okay, we institute what's called the huddle, okay, and that is evidence secured, the guy's in jail, we're going to write reports. But before we do anything like that, before the reports, we will, as a group, regardless of rank, I said, now my bars are off my collar.
Hmm.
Marty or whoever it is, stripes are off his sleeve. Let's
Right.
talk about how we could do this better.
Yeah.
Now that's very, very productive. And I said, now if you have criticisms of me, you have criticisms of so-and-so, this stays in the family, but we're going to talk, and well, Joe, you cross the line of fire, blah, blah, blah. You should have done it this way. And then a lot of scenario, we trained all the time,
Yeah.
always training,
Hmm.
simulated training, talking about cases, so there was never, that we were never done with the operation until we had that meeting. And
Right.
it could be blunt, but but in those times, those are teaching. For me, it was teaching
Teaching
moments.
moments. I love it. Tell me about this idea that the chaplain would have free reign. I don't know if I'm saying that correctly.
Yeah. So as we discussed earlier, the idea of having a chaplain
Hmm.
um, is, I learned very, very early on, uh, and that was when I had as a sergeant, there's not a lot of, I mean, I had, as a sergeant, you were like a foreman. Okay. But one of the things I did as a sergeant, as a patrol sergeant, the sergeant was responsible for the briefings before the guys went out on their shift. So it was at San Dimas, where I was a sergeant, patrol sergeant. It was in this room. Everybody sat down. We had a thing called the briefing board, so I'd go through it. We're looking for this guy. This happened. This robbery occurred, such and such. Or we had a burglary here. And give out this. There would always be a teaching moment. To remind them of a policy. It'd include an inspection to make sure that they had their gear correct. Right. Everyone had their stuff, and then they would go out individually, they'd leave to their patrol areas, because the patrol areas divided into zones. And they're identified by call letters, for the radio and so forth.
Right.
So I remember, I'll tell you, so one time, and because San Dimas was popular, the academy would send for weekend ride-alongs and to ride along with the patrol cars to see what it's like, to watch and listen. And I would end my briefings with a prayer. And prayer for safety, send them off. And I remember I do this briefing board, and I said, okay, now we'll have our prayer, because the guys expected it. And right. this little cadet pipes up, "You can't do that."
Yeah.
And I looked at him. I said, "I'm a sergeant, and I can do any damn thing I want."
Amen.
And he got the message. I said, "You can stay in the station if it makes you uncomfortable.
Yeah.
Or you can go home." He says, "No, Sarge. No, Sergeant. I will ride in the car." Good. I said, "Good."
Yeah. Yeah.
So it's probably true. I couldn't do that, but I did anyway. So from then on, when I became a lieutenant, I think I told you, I started, the jail, the men's jail has a chaplaincy. The jails, they're designed to work with families of inmates and the inmates themselves, but I opened it up to the staff. And of course, I gave authorization to the chaplains to have free reign in the jail. That had enormous implications.
Yeah.
That they could go anywhere. They didn't have to have a deputy's permission to go into a cell block or to ask for an inmate. I mean, of course they would. They'd come in and say, I want to go to cell such and such, or see so and so, and they knew per my memoranda that they had to accommodate it. That was a different deal than saying, "No, I'm too busy. You can't do that."
Right. Right. And how did that affect maybe the officers that were serving with you?
Well, it affected them because they knew that there's going to be credibility between inmate abuse as reported to the chaplain. But it also did a lot of things, Pela. The chaplains would report to health, to the clinic. This guy's being denied a clinic visit, or his medications are being denied, or he's being deliberately, his mail is he's not getting his mail. He's being denied the commissary, and they would deal with directly with the deputy. Is there a problem? Can I help you with it? They would know they can't inflict that kind of nonsense.
Right. It's interesting, because when we talked about this before, I didn't quite have an understanding of why it was so important for the chaplain's hands to be free, and for him or her to be able to move freely, essentially.
Right.
I just thought, oh, okay, well, everybody has a chance to decompress, but
No,
it's
no.
much further than that.
Right, because some deputies will allow other inmates to be the bullies,
Hmm.
and the payoff for them is that everything is quiet in the dorm or
Hmm.
in the living area, the living, cell blocks. But a lot of abuse inmate on inmates occurring, and that's a huge deal.
Right, right. And so the chaplain becomes somewhat of a gatekeeper to say, no,
Exactly.
yeah, there are things that need attention here. Interesting.
And then it's sometimes uh, the deputies themselves will struggle, marriages,
Right.
other problems. Some are just flat brutal. They're
Right.
brutal at home, they're brutal on the job,
Hmm.
and unfortunately, there are those kinds of people.
Yeah. Yeah. And how does a chaplain play into those scenarios?
Well, sometimes I told the staff, you could talk to the chaplain, and the chaplain can give you advice and
Hmm.
help. And I don't want to know about it. But you just cannot overstate the influence of having that influence, that
Hmm.
righteous influence
Hmm.
in an organization. It just leaches out into all things that are occurring. And sometimes you can help. If I could salvage a guy, I would. But if I couldn't,
Hmm.
then the greater good has to be accommodated. Uh, has to be considered important. So, and as I said, if you create that influence, then other staff will be reinforcing. They'll tell their brother officer or sister officer, "You can't do that. You can't do
Yeah.
that here."
Yeah. Yeah. The heart of 10 turned to
Right.
10,000. Yeah. Wow. It's interesting because, I guess I'm thinking in my own life of where kind of influence, where that kind of mentality would be beneficial. And it's beneficial in all things. It's to set the tone, set the idea of who we're going to be, how we're going to be like that, how we're going to execute that. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah. So I hesitate to ask, but I'm going to ask. Do you think that there's an answer during this time where people are calling for police reforms, defunding the police, things of that nature?
Well, this is not new to me,
That's true.
Kate.
Right.
I mean, I've watched this come and go, and I think it's going to result in some very good results, but there's some damage that will occur,
Mm-hmm.
and we'll see. I think I'm just I'm worried about some of the without going to the root cause, that the approach is to just destroy. Now, there's a concept that's valid, taking
Mm-hmm.
something, just closing something down and starting all over again.
Right.
But let me give an example. There's a bit of a commentary right now about mental health units being formed that are not police
Mm-hmm.
and will not have police powers,
Mm-hmm.
and will be sent out solo or by themselves without the protective care
Right.
of law enforcement. Well, I mean, that can result in some really bad results because statistically, now let me say first, the law enforcement profession is a very safe profession statistically. A lot of people don't realize it. It's not dangerous. It's a lot safer than a truck driver. It's a lot safer than a bus driver, a taxi driver. It's safer than a logger,
Mm-hmm.
a commercial fisherman, longshoreman.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of construction is more dangerous. It's safer than being a fireman.
Yeah.
So, but people Just 1 second here, Pela.
Okay.
I'm getting a low battery. There we go.
Plugging in. I'm taking a quick drink.
I didn't realize it was, now it's on charge. So the point I was bringing up was, but there, statistically, aside from getting involved in traffic accidents,
Mhm.
the most hazardous of all calls is domestic violence.
Yeah.
So just 1 second here. I got to. Okay, now I think I'm doing okay. Okay, we're good. So
The hazard of
if
domestic violence.
if you send out a social worker that has no police powers or protection in case something really goes bad.
Yeah.
I mean, I've been as a deputy, I go out to domestic violence, and the guy, is drunk. He's beating up his wife. He's beating up his kids, and there's just no way he's going to be talked into anything.
Mm-hmm.
He's got to go to jail.
Mm-hmm.
So he goes to the kitchen and you tell him, you're going to have to come with me tonight. And he goes to the kitchen, grabs a kitchen knife or a butcher knife and says, come and get me. Now, what's the social worker going to do?
Right. Yeah.
Because what I have to do is pull out my baton and say, this is really going to hurt.
Yeah.
And I do not want to do this.
Right.
So I'll put down this knife. But what's the social worker going to do?
Right.
And that's going to happen time and time again. I mean, that specifically is going to happen time and time again.
Yeah.
So it might be something worse than that. So without the tactical training, the intense scenario role play that you put them through to make sure they're going to be okay and know how to just keep an eye on things and position themselves safely and stay out of harm's way while you deal with the problem.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know how that can occur with just sending a social worker out solo. So that's just one example.
Mm-hmm.
The Constitution, the rule of law, requires police.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, there has to be a police. So to say, well, we're going to disband the police, it's nonsense.
Mm-hmm.
Now, to change what's going on, to take it seriously. And for example, Chicago, for years and years and years, this has been pointed out to them. Mm-hmm. And they have just totally dug in and saying, yeah, we understand. We really do believe it. But nothing's changed. Then that's another issue.
Right. And that I think is the deeper thing that has to be looked at. If you've known for years and years, you can acknowledge this problem. Where does the change have to come from?
Well, it's got to change in the among the selected leadership. Like I said, it's got to. Probably the best method is when there's an overseer, temporary overseer with authority, mm-hmm. That has a really good understanding of how to do this changing. And a good example of that is Bratton, who was a commissioner in New York and went to LA and became their chief of police, and he established some really good policies. Mm-hmm. I don't think it was sufficient, but those policies now have been degraded to a very significant extent. I can give you some examples. Then Bratton went to Oakland. And Oakland, there's one time in Oakland, they had 5 chiefs of police in 1 week. Just incredible. they are a leper colony. I mean, they are,
Yeah.
if anything needs to be disbanded and reorganized, disband and reorganize would be another, that would be okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
Sometimes legally you might have to do that to, in other words, to close down all of the past agreements with the police leagues or the police unions
Hmm.
that have encumber honest investigations and honest discipline and stuff like that.
Hmm.
And then bring up a new department with different structure, different,
Yeah.
with that might work. But
What happened in Oakland that it was just so toxic there?
corruption. And they had a group called, like the Vikings, called the Riders. They were notorious.
Mm.
And they still have these groups.
Yeah.
And the LA Sheriff's Department still has these groups.
Wow.
They have not dealt with these groups.
So then what?
Well, it's a leadership issue,
Hmm.
and it's I think what's going to come out of this is at least a fundamental writings of what a good police department is supposed to be like Sir Robert Peel's 9 Principles of Policing that I shared with you, right?
You didn't tell me about that. Tell me about. Oh, maybe you actually told me what
Yeah,
the
I
9
think,
principles were.
yeah. So, I think I mentioned Sir Robert in 1830
Hmm.
was tasked with establishing a police department in London, the London Metropolitan Police Department, the first modern police department.
Hmm.
Now, the police before that, the European model is the palace guard military.
Okay.
And they would come out, it goes back to where they would come out from the castle and squash, crack a few heads or whatever,
Yeah.
and that type of thing. That's what Victor Hugo talked about in The Hunchback of Notre Dame. That. But so Sir Robert, in establishing the Metropolitan Police, the first thing he wrote is, "This is not the military model." And then he wrote 9 Principles. So, and that's why they call him Bobbies to this day, after Sir Robert. I don't know. He became Prime Minister of England later on. So his model is you're only going to be able to operate as police with the respect and support of the public.
Right.
And then and that's proportionate. The way you use force and the amount of force you inflict is going to influence the respect and support you're going to get from the people you're serving. And the police are servants, and that kind of thing.
Right. Right.
So if we go to that model and we establish those principles, and then build an organization that services those concepts.
Hmm.
And then there are some administrative necessities. There has to be a chain of command. There has to be logistical support. There has to be, and one of them will be obviously the technology of cameras and body-worn cameras. We will have this, and if you don't turn it on, you're in trouble. In fact, we're going to give you something that will not ever turn off.
Right.
And you're going to put it on just every time you go on the shift, like the gun you wear on your. Now, we don't have that yet. You understand what the implication? I can turn this off.
Yeah.
And, and everybody looks the other way. Well, we can't do that.
Right. Right. It's interesting that you bring that up, because I completely forgot that I was going to ask you to retell me that story from the Republic that I was looking for about the ring, because I can't remember the name.
Did you find it?
Not yet.
Oh, well, you can Google it and
Yeah.
get it that way, and they'll give you it's the second volume, I think.
Oh, there's another volume. Oh. Would you tell us that story?
Right. So this is this is an illustration of what the question becomes between Plato and Socrates, and actually between Plato and his brother. And as I said yesterday or day before, I can't remember his name, and I still can't remember his name. So they're discussing the issue of virtue and men's propensity to do evil if they're not accountable. But the argument that there are men of virtue that will embrace virtue because of their intellect and for the sake of virtue.
Mm-hmm.
And so the brother reminds Plato of the story of the Ring of Gyges, which is Gyges is a shepherd in the kingdom of Lydia, and he's one of the king's shepherds.
Mm-hmm.
And the king of Lydia is a tyrant. He's really a bad guy. It's never good to be around him. And Lydia is part of Turkey. It was a big kingdom back in those days. So the king required a report once a year from one of the shepherds on how the flocks are doing, and it was never a good experience. So, in fact, sometimes it would be a deadly experience. Nobody wants to do this thing.
Mm-hmm.
It's a big argument, and during this time, the time is approaching. Gyges is out with the flock, and there's a storm, earthquake, and the side of the mountain that's close by opens up. Gyges goes to the opening and sees that it's a tomb, and that in the tomb is a sarcophagus with a corpse and a ring on the corpse.
Funny, I just took off mine too. I'm like, yes.
Yeah. So Gyges takes the ring, and at the campfire, when the argument's going on, Gyges puts the ring on, and he discovers that putting the ring on makes him invisible. He cannot be seen. They can't see him, but he can see them. He takes, and they're not aware of his presence. And then he takes the ring off, and he's back. And so he volunteers to go back. And with the power of this ring, Gyges seduces the queen, and together they conspire to kill the king, and Gyges becomes king of Lydia. The point being, without accountability, with a cloak of invisibility, which can be the code of silence, all kinds of things, right? Then men will do evil and have a propensity to evil. So that's a fundamental reality, human nature.
That's yeah. So I can't leave the kids at home for too long. Yeah. Yeah. It's a lot to think about just in there.
There's a lot to think about. There's a lot, fellas.
Yeah.
And even at my age, I'm doing a lot of it still.
Yeah. Trying to find the answers and the ways. And all of it is, and like, I guess kind of regardless of what answers anyone can come up with for the world in general, it always has to start back at home, back with yourself, right?
Exactly.
Every time.
Right.
Yeah, there's so much to it. There's just so much to it. But I guess, if people are willing to hold themselves accountable, it could be done. Do you have a strong
hope if they love truth, and they're willing to abide by truth, then it really invisibility is a non-issue, don't you think?
It shouldn't be. Yeah. Yes, I'm with you.
Now,
That's a lot of integrity.
There's a name for it. It's called integrity.
Yeah, exactly.
That's the name we give it.
Integrity. Exactly. So do you have answers for the world? Anything else that should be thought about? Forget the world. For me, so that I can have a balanced view when I'm looking at things. There's so much here.
Well, it's a big bite of the apple, sis.
Like trying to swallow without chewing. Yeah.
Can you just see Eve, telling Adam,
Yeah.
let's get this show on the road?
Right. Like, let's just keep going. Let's just move. Let's just do it. Yeah. Oh, yeah. It's
Yeah.
a lot. Yeah.
Humor is a godly trait. Have you
Thank
ever
you.
thought of that?
No, but I mean,
It
we laugh
really
all the
helps.
time. Yes, it does. Very helpful. Yes, 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 yes. Oh, this is good. Do you teach? You do teach?
Well, that was the point. When I retired to be a teacher, and
Mhm.
I just loved it. But the phone rang and rang,
Yeah.
and then my wife passed away, and so I wound up doing this full time. So this is what I do, and I consider when I take the stand and answer questions,
Hmm.
if it's done right, I become what I want to do is become a school teacher to the juries so that they can make a judgment for the plaintiff,
Hmm.
or to come to justice, but most of all to send a message to the department: don't you ever do this again. That's my hope. So
Yeah. Yes. Clean this up and do it now.
right,
Right.
there's a lot of ways to create change, and um, one of them is what that you brought up is disband it, start it all over again.
Hmm.
you know uh, there's a lot of stupidity, but we'll get through it.
Something else was coming behind that. A lot of stupidity.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I'm an optimist, as you can see.
Right. And
I like being happy. I just think the alternative stinks.
that's, yeah. I'm on the same page with you with that one.
Yeah, I can tell.
So what do? You believe that people can change. You believe you have hope for the future. You have.
Oh, I think that, and this goes back to where we started from. We started as intelligence, as you know.
Yeah.
Then we were invited to become embodied in spirit bodies through a birth
Hmm.
to our Father and our Mother in heaven. Now that required choice, right?
Hmm.
And that's why choice it's an eternal thing. It's can decide, but it appealed to us. We're willing, and choice, it requires obedience, right?
Right.
I mean, but it's that obedience has to be willing. Otherwise, it doesn't work.
Right. Right.
So now we're in this process, and so my view of us in mortality uh, is that we will never resist truth forever. I think that's a fundamental rule, that eternal truth. Intelligence will never resist truth forever.
It's kind of loaded. Will you unpack that for us?
Yeah. This way I teach it to, as I expressed it to my kids in English, I love the literature piece and teaching it.
Hmm.
I'd express it this way, pretty simplistically. Let's consider that in this world that we live, the majority of the population considered that the Earth is flat, and they just take you outside and say, "You see that horizon? That's where it ends."
Hmm.
And obviously what you're seeing is flat. You see mountains and everything, but the Earth's flat.
Right.
You don't see any curve. You don't see any rim. So therefore, it's flat. Now, does that change the fact that the Earth is round?
Absolutely not.
No. So then I draw a little thing, cloud and a
Hmm.
blackboard, and I write truth. So the truth is the truth is the truth.
Right.
Then I tell the story of Galileo, where he, the fundamental religious belief, in fact, it was essential to the rest of the doctrine, that the earth, being God's creation, made it the center of the world, center of the universe,
Mm-hmm.
and that all things revolved around it.
Around it. Mm-hmm.
And Galileo discovered, no, that's not true. That's not what's happening here.
Yeah.
They take Galileo aside and they say, if you say this again, we're going to kill you.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so Galileo has to cave in. I said, did that change anything? Does that change it? No.
No.
The truth is independent. And so the search of truth is directly linked to happiness. And without the discovery of truth, which requires a search,
Mm-hmm.
can't discover something unless you search it. And the willingness to embrace it when it's there,
Mm-hmm.
is unhappiness. In fact, it's called sin. That's another term for sin.
Yeah.
So our duty, I said, now, I tell my little guys, my duty is to bring to you some truth. And so we're off on this great adventure this semester.
Oh, does that mean that I get to call you every Sunday?
Huh?
Does that mean I get to call you every Sunday? And
You can call me anytime, Paula. Anytime you have something on your heart. But you can talk to Honey too.
Yes. Just go ahead and give me a time slot and I will be there. Right.
So
Yeah.
does this help?
Yes, absolutely.
So we would have our little discussions at the dinner table about truth. There's some fundamental truths. You cannot go back in time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
You cannot be two places at once.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, when you bump into that, I want to go back and change things or relive.
Mm-hmm.
It's not productive. It's not
You
happy.
do not have a time machine. Mm-hmm.
Right. And you can't be two places at once. So when you have decisions to make, what do I do here? And don't regret it. I mean, the regret is another tool, that gets in our way.
Mm-hmm.
Move forward. And as you know, President Nelson says, it's the path you're on. It's the path.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Yeah.
And that's implied in the workers of the field. Some start at the beginning of the day, some start
in the middle, some start at the end.
But they're working. They're working. They get on the path and they're working.
Right.
And even at the end of the day, you all get the same pay.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I like it.
And then when he's questioning about it, he says, I think I'm the owner of this field. I decided.
Yeah.
And incidentally, I paid all costs. And I'm inviting you as a gift to take my penny. That's what he's saying.
Yes. I'm going to spend the rest of the day in the parables. Like I feel it.
Yeah.
Yeah. This is all so good. Thank you.